Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am their host for every Monday, Ethan Orfe. And last time we spoke, there was not a national champion yet. And now there is. The LSU Bayou Bengal Tigers won the national championship. And it seemed to be pretty well, well won. They seem to have good control of the game for majority of the game. And Joe Burrow, of course, offensive MVP. It was just a really, really good showing. Their defense had some big plays in there, and Clemson put up a decent fight. And definitely that last image of Trevor Lawrence is something that is kind of burned into my mind of recent time. I'm thinking about it, that Clemson is going to be back, and they're probably going to be in the top 4, of course, as we're going to talk a little bit later about some really, really early top 25 rankings and seeing where teams are going to be around for the most part. But I just wanted to talk about the overall experience of watching that national championship game, because I haven't really talked about it since it happened. But the national championship game was super interesting from a different standpoints. It looked like LSU was going to get punched in the mouth at first, and they kind of did. Clemson went up and scored after LSU had a few failed drives, and then they finally put something on the board. But Clemson was clawing and fighting and really putting up an effort to show that, they belong here and they're not just going to sit here and let LSU do whatever they wanted to on offense. And that's a testament to their defense and their defensive game plan. And Dabo Swinney always getting people prepared to play the game. And they really tried to make things hard for Joe Burrow in the offense to really get the ball moving. But at the end of the day, you could really see that that Joe Burrow really just has the it factor. And I think that's kind of what changed the game. Not to say that Clemson doesn't have their own version of the it factor in Trevor Lawrence, as it was a really big back and forth battle between them in the first half, at least. And then in the second half, it just was just not enough big plays made on the Clemson side of the ball. There were some turnovers here or there. And at the end of the day, they just couldn't stop LSU from scoring as much as, nobody really could. And you look at it from the grand scheme of things, LSU beat 7 top 10 ranked teams in the nation. So, and that was, it was 6 before the fourth national championship win. And when you really look at it all across the board, just what they were able to accomplish this season, and people still was not sure that LSU was the best team in the country, as the people were very, very big on Ohio State still. They still think that, Ohio State was the better team. Just because the LSU defense was not statistically that good, and they just thought that, eventually, whenever they face a really, really good contender, it would show its ugly, its ugly face. And it never really did that. And primarily because LSU's defense really wasn't that bad. It's just that when you have an offense that scores so much and you get up by a certain amount of points, the other team just has ample amount of opportunities to try and score on that defense. And you're trying to eat clock, so you're not being as aggressive anymore, and you're playing like not really a prevent, but it's that defense to where you're trying to eat time as much as possible, keep people in bounds. You're not trying to let people save clock to try and come back in the game. So a lot of those stats did not look well for LSU going in, but if you watch them play, you knew that there are a lot of big players on that team, especially in the secondary, and you saw it really in all national championship game where the Clemson wide receivers had a really tough time getting open. They had a tough time really getting their routes going, and Trevor Lawrence was having to make reads longer than he'd want to, and he wasn't getting the ball out as quickly as he'd like to. And he had to do a lot, or the Clemson offense had to do a lot with their legs in that game. And they had some deep shots here or there that, ended up getting some traction, but it wasn't as easy as it could be for them. And that's just a testament to the LSU defense because they made it difficult and they didn't want, Trevor Lawrence really to pick them apart. They knew what he's capable of, and they wanted him to make decisions that would work in their favor. So they wanted him to run the ball a little bit more than sit in the pocket and pass, because they have fast linebackers and they have fast DBs that can come and close out and keep him from picking up too much yardage. And it's easier to play contained that way rather than to kind of be loose in the secondary and somebody gets left wide open or somebody makes a good break and that goes for 6. So on the other side of the coin though, Clemson had a really good defense and LSU still torched them near the end of the game. It was getting really close. They could have scored again, but of course, class act that is Ed Orgeron, he decided to kneel out the ball. So in reality, LSU really offensively was just like they were all season long. They did have some struggles early on, but I mean, it's a national championship game. You're going up against high competition, a lot of Sunday players all around. What more could you really ask from a performance from an offensive standpoint? The game plan was really good. They were really balanced in attack, and some of the throws that Joe Burrow was making and didn't make, but came out of his hands were just really like swan song type stuff. Like he was showing his this was one of the greatest things college football will ever see in a season, really, from a quarterback. And it's been debated whether or not this is the greatest season ever for a QB or a greatest season ever for a college player. And I'm not too sure as far as a college quarterback. I mean, there's been some really, really good seasons, but maybe as just like a player in a story, like this is like one of the greatest college football stories you'll ever see, or a player in Joe Burrow who last year just was not the same guy that we saw this year. And just the story of compounded with how Ed Orgeron had kind of been bouncing around, and then he got his dream job, but people were really unsure about him. And he didn't really have a lot proven to say he could do this job, especially after the Ole Miss stint. And, there was a lot of talent, of course, and then LSU has always been the team that people thought, if they can just get past Alabama, maybe they can make some noise, because their defense was always been really good, especially in the Les Miles era. But to be honest, their offense was really archaic, and no one expected such an explosion in just throwing the football, making deception in their scheming and in the formations that they were bringing out, and people going in motion, and just the amount of, I guess, ability shown on the offensive end. Nobody expected this in the first kind of iteration of this, and it's kind of all weird how it kind of comes to an end now, because a lot of people are leaving off of LSU's coaching staff. A lot of good players are going into the draft or entering the draft. And it's going to be really interesting to see how LSU kind of tries to really make themselves a staple into a top 4, top 5 team in the nation for years to come. So we'll just have to wait and see on all of that. So we're going to take a quick break here, and then coming back, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened off the field as far as the national championship game, just some Odell stuff, some just the cigars, how the media's kind of been looking at the post-national championship win that's coming up.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so let's get into the Odell Beckham Jr. thing. So Odell, of course, a former player of the LSU football Tigers, and he came out to the national championship game in New Orleans and had himself a ball from what it looks like. He was all over the place. He was on the field after the game. He was former players and messing around with people like, who was it? Former NBA Karl Malone. He was posting up Karl Malone on the national championship field, and he got his shot blocked, kinda. There was no basketball really involved, but he was just goofing around and playing around, and he wound himself in the locker room. He was giving money on the field, so to speak. Some people say it was fake. It was reported it was fake money, and then it was said that it was real money, so I don't really know exactly who to believe on that, but then he was inside the locker room, right? And he was giving out this weird speech. Like, there's just like a lot of clips of Odell from that night, just doing all different types of crazy stuff. And then one that really surfaced that became a bigger story than you thought the money thing would be, because the NCAA was, Odell slaps the backside of a police officer who was interacting with an LSU player, I believe, for smoking a cigar in the middle of the locker room, and the police officer looked at him as an Odell Beckham in a weird way, I guess. It was, he did it, and then that was just kind of the end of the clip. There wasn't really any altercation after that, but there was a charge placed, or a warrant for his arrest for that, and eventually the charges did get dropped for this, but it was just it's weird how Odell was just in the news like this all over the place, and there was a lot of people in the talking head circle saying if Odell is a distraction, or just he can't let certain players just have their moment and stuff like that. And I just think he was having fun. He was trying to have a good time, and maybe he had too much of a good time. And we all can kind of have similar experiences of having too much fun and not knowing when to dial it back, because that's just how he's still young. Young people do young people stuff, and I hope that he learns from this sort of thing and doesn't let this determine who he is as a person, because I don't really think this wasn't really all that bad in the grand scheme of things comparative to other antics we've seen from other people, and people like to make him seem like a distraction, a la like Antonio Brown, and him and the Antonio Brown thing are vastly different, but people like to ship them together, like, because they're wide receivers and they're divas on the field, and all of a sudden it's a problem. But in reality, Odell didn't have that much of a diva attitude this year on the field. He looked like he was frustrated, but it doesn't mean he wasn't throwing tantrums and getting into coaches' faces, not nearly as much as what we've seen in the past. And I just think he cares about the game of football, but that's the football side of it. In reality, he was just out there having fun and really living in the moment of something that was really, truly special. And, he was a part of the history of LSU as well. So, he was just having fun. It was just interesting to see how the media spun all of that. And then, of course, the cigars in the locker room stuff. I just think that's it's the rule. You can't smoke indoors in the stadium. That's a rule in place. I'm kind of interested how it kind of got inside the locker rooms. If they didn't want them to, what did they think that was going to really happen there, to be honest? They brought the cigars in the locker room. I'm sure they passed it around. I'm sure people were around to see it. There's plenty of videos of Joe Burrow just over here puffing on the cigar. And there's just it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of care in the world. But then there was the video, of course, of the Odell thing, and then everybody's making a big deal of the cigars. And people are talking about, oh, this is a bad look. These guys are kids. I mean, most of them, I would assume that everybody on that team is have the legal age to smoke a cigar. So it's their choice. They're adults. They can do what they want to do. And that's the legal right of being 18-year-old in this country. So now it's not a legal right to smoke indoors. So, rules are rules. And that's just kind of the end all be all in that. I think some people were blowing this way out of proportion. People were saying, oh, immaturity, the LSU, Joe Burrow, all of them. This comes down on Ed Orgeron, and he should have been more strict on his team. I just think people are looking for something to talk down upon this moment because everybody likes to chime in on something. I just think it was, I thought it was pretty cool, and, it wasn't that big of a deal. Same thing with the video that surfaced when they went to the White House, they made that little Thriller video, which I thought was pretty funny. And apparently kids can't have fun because, of course they have to be professionals in a non-professional league. And, they're not allowed to have fun and make videos after winning the biggest achievement of their collegiate careers and maybe some of them even their life. You never know. And they're supposed to just be perfect individuals in this sort of situation. And even, perfect isn't even the right word because they didn't do anything wrong. They just made a Thriller video and people are saying, oh, this is unprofessional. People should be more respectful of the White House. It's just a Thriller video. I think they're just having fun and they're living their best life in the moment. And I think that's really just the gist of all of this, that people have a hard time dealing with other people's display of happiness. And sometimes it's not always as, honorable, quote unquote, whatever some people like to think of it as. People like to celebrate. People like to smile. People like to move around. People like to dance. People like to hug each other. People celebrate in different ways. Not everybody is going to be a statue. Not everybody is just going to say thank you and move on because that's a huge achievement. I'd hope that whoever has these type of opinions are able to keep themselves to that similar standard. And I hope that they're able to enjoy life when they have good things come to them and they don't have to be robots and just shake a hand and move on. Because at the end of the day, that's just not how life works. Good things are meant to be celebrated because, life is very short and fleeting and you shouldn't always be so worried about how other people see you. Those guys went out there and played their hearts out for a whole season and they should be allowed to be able to celebrate it and have fun and make memories with their teammates and with their family members for them to look back on for years to come. And no amount of, give the football to the ref mentality is going to really stop them from living their life and being who they are. Because at the end of the day, this is who they are, and that's how they got there, being who they were. That didn't stop them from playing well on the field. That didn't stop them from scoring big touchdowns and getting good numbers and getting stats. And it didn't look bad. None of this was really surfacing when they were winning and playing the sport of football. So there's really no reason to keep harping on these old ideals that people have to be a certain way and have to show a certain level of professionalism, quote unquote, especially after they win something. It's just tired old speech. People can't show emotion in sports for some reason, even though sports is one of the most emotionally driven commodities that we have in media. Whenever somebody wins the championship, people are screaming, people are crying, people are putting their hands on their face, disappointment. It's like one of the most emotionally driven moments in anything. Somebody has to go home disappointed. Somebody has to go home with the best feeling in the world. Like they're on top of the world. They're on top of their profession. They're the best in their profession at that moment in time. There should be no other feeling. And seeing the level of raw emotion come out of those moments and people being able to celebrate is unreal. It's like when people win the Stanley Cup and they get to take it for a day or a week or however long it is. They just live it up. They do all different types of ridiculous stuff. And you don't see, I think it's just really a cultural thing. I think it's because of the college culture. People think that, they're supposed to be like, I guess, army people or people in the Navy or, soldiers. And they're kids, man. They're football players who are also young adults. Let them have fun. So we're going to take another quick break. And when I come back, we're going to talk a little bit about people returning kind of surprisingly to Clemson and also people who are heading out the door as the new season will be upon us in about 200 or so days. So Clemson's looking to retool and regroup just like every other program out there. So we're going to talk about that coming up.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So Clemson, as we come back out of this break, Clemson is having an interesting, off season. I don't really know exactly how to talk about college football off seasons because it's really about losing players and recruiting and really how to keep a program from kind of fumbling over itself or crumbling under itself rather than fumbling. So Clemson is having some interesting, early off-season things. Of course, we knew about T. Higgins. He decided to declare, but also recently declared has been Isaiah Simmons, and he is one of the most versatile players to ever be seen in college football. He is just a monster. So this is actually an interesting stat line coming from Phil Yates. He showed all of the alignments for Clemson in 2019-20 season that Isaiah Simmons was at on the defensive side of the ball. So he played 218 snaps at safety, 286 snaps at slot cornerback, 160 snaps at outside linebacker, middle linebacker / inside linebacker. He did 120 snaps, and perimeter cornerback, he played 17 snaps. He rushed the passer 71 times and had 7 sacks. And just for his overall numbers, he had 102 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 3 interceptions, 8 passes broken up, and a forced fumble. He's going to be a super top 10 pick for somebody in the National Football League. I don't really know exactly who needs a guy, or who should I say, who doesn't need a guy like that, but he'll definitely be a top 10 prospect for sure. And it's just going to be interesting to see if somebody's going to try and trade up for him or something like that, who needs a guy on a defense to be the Swiss Army knife, to be like Tyrann Mathieu is, or to be like how Mark Barron, if you guys remember who he was, or how he is. Mark Barron was a guy who was drafted as a safety, and then he kind of converted into linebacker, but he plays safety and linebacker kind of in and out. So guys that can play multiple positions, just like kind of in basketball where guys are multi-faceted and being able to play the 2 through the 4 or 1 through 5, or be able to guard like the 1 through 5. You want to be able to have versatile multi-positional defenders. That's really hard to find in football because it's such a technique sport. You can't just bounce around to do different positions, because each position has different techniques that you have to master to be at the NFL level. So I'm sure you'll have to kind of pick one, but it's really nice to have a player that can go out there and play at a high level at certain positions that others focus on their whole careers to do and be able to do and do well. So he's going to be a guy that if you need somebody who can just be a presence on defense, definitely a guy you would probably look to draft. And also in other news, the really other side of this coin is, Travis Etienne. He decides to stay in school. And I know that's really controversial because I'm also one of the people that believe that you got to go out there and get yours when it's time, right? And I know that I'm not saying that as a caveat to what I've also said when, people come out, may go to the draft too soon or may not believe that, or they sit out senior games and stuff like that. That's different. This is when your talent is recognizable to the masses to be able to be drafted this year, and you don't have to risk any more injury without pay. You can have security in your life for your family and all that. And he decides to go back to school. And, that is something that only he could have decided. And he is, going to do that. His teammate, Terrell, who was the cornerback, he just decided to declare that he will enter the draft. And I'm just interested to see what's going to happen with him for next year's draft, because I assume that he's going to try and play football next year on the NFL level. But if he doesn't perform as well as he did this year, his draft stock is definitely going to fall. He's going to be 1 year older. And, and the running back position in the NFL, although the value of it has changed on what you're able to do on the field and what teams value in a running back, the value for how running backs are paid, just how long they can stay in the league, the amount of punishment running backs take. The Father Time waits for no man, and running back is a sport. Running back is a position that ages really fast, and you don't typically see a lot of 30-year-old running backs who are still in the league doing what they did when they were 26 or 27. The window of high playability for running backs just depletes as time goes on. It's just how the position is and always has been like that. So to be able to, I guess, hurt your pockets this early, that's a really hefty choice. Now, I feel like he probably has one of those deals where he will be compensated no matter where he gets drafted. He probably has draft insurance. I've heard that before. I know NBA players do that, where no matter what happens, if they fall, they still get a certain amount of money, I guess, through agency. I don't really know exactly how that works, but I've heard of it before. So maybe he's doing that, draft insurance, which, more power to him. If he wants to finish his degree, you can't hate on that, and you shouldn't hate on that. It's a man's choice, and he made that choice for himself. So he gets to come back and play with arguably the best player in college football in Trevor Lawrence. So what can you really hate him for that? Maybe he just likes school. So Mel Kiper had Etienne as the number 4 draft eligible running back for that class. So we'll just have to wait and see where he will be placed after this. And I guess this will be something that we'll just have to keep looking back on as the Clemson season starts next year, just to see where that offense is going to be, if he can still play at a high level. So what's going to really come out of this? So that's just interesting that people will still make that decision. I remember while we were waiting on Tua's decision, most people thought that he would come out of the draft or come out to the draft. I also thought he'd come out to the draft because Nick Saban doesn't really keep players longer than how longer they need to be. So if he feels like a player is, draft eligible and ready to go, Nick Saban is not somebody who's like, no, you have to stay. And I mean, no coach really is going to tell a player to stay somewhere if he's available to go, because that's not their decision. But Nick is very encouraging for his players to, live out their dreams and go to the next level. And he has been one of the best coaches at being able to build after good players leave. So he has the track record to say that, we'll be fine without you. Not to say we don't need you or don't want you, but, go do you. Go live your dreams. Go be as great as you can be. So when you see something like this, it just reminds you that not every decision is just a PR stunt. Not to say that Tua's decision was a PR stunt, but, not every decision is supposedly to drive, national media to look at me as I make this decision, or this is the decision, like what LeBron did. Not everything is like that. So it's very interesting to see how this went a little bit left field instead of right field this time. So that's just really all there is to that. I hope for the best for Etienne. I hope he stays healthy, because this is real potential for him to lose some dollars. And as somebody who always is very valuable about his money, you don't want to mess with the money. That's what my dad always told me, son. When it comes to things that you don't want to be messed with, it's your name and your dollars. So I'm going to leave that and take another quick break, and then we're going to talk about LSU's future alongside of Clemson's now. So we just talked about Clemson. We'll talk about LSU, because a lot of their coaching staff is being changed around, and that's what happens when you have successful programs. People leave and get better jobs. So that'll be coming up right after this.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so it's not particularly uncommon for coaches to leave for higher promotions after doing a outstanding job at their current position, especially if they win something like a national title, or they win awards or stuff like that throughout the regular season for their time and tenure spent at their current positions. But LSU is facing a certain level of coaches leaving that most teams don't see in one season or another so much, especially integral parts of what seems to be what made LSU what it was this year, especially on the offensive end. So first up, we all know about Joe Brady, who will now be the offensive coordinator under Matt Rule in Carolina for the Carolina Panthers. That was something that was already discussed early on, and very much so that we just had to take into consideration for the LSU Tigers. And now we're hearing that their defensive coordinator that they had since 2016, which is Dave Arnada, he's going to be the head coach of Baylor University in Texas. So there's a lot of people, a lot of things moving and shaking for LSU, and it's got me thinking about just this current run that they had this year under Ed Orgeron, and it's gotten me thinking about Ed Orgeron's, I guess, chance to go at another title in the next few years, as they're going to be top ranked, probably 3. I feel like 3 or 4 is where they're going to be at, and it's tough to see what that team is going to be able to do now, because you would think that someone like Joe Burrow is a special player. I didn't even mention that a lot of players are leaving that are high profile. So, Justin Jefferson and Joe Burrow and, their other wide receiver as well. And it's just going to be really, really big time it's going to be a big time challenge for Ed Orgeron to bring this team back to the playoffs, just because of so much they've lost. The season was very magical, and it seems like everything is it had a happy forever after ending, but in reality, there's another season to play next year, and to be honest, the jury still might be out on Ed Orgeron I think he's a wonderful leader. He showed that he can lead men. He can lead a football team to the promised land. However, I'm not sure just how well of the X's and O's is going to be coming out of Ed Orgeron this time around. And that's the reason why you have coordinators and such. But these guys were at the top of their class. As you can see, they're getting to bigger and better positions. So it really is you don't really know exactly where it's going to be. Maybe, we see more of the Ole Miss Ed Orgeron after all these guys leave, and it's more of a challenge. And the expectations have been set so high for him now. What can LSU do now? Or maybe it's just that national media has found their darling in Ed Orgeron, and now it's just going to be an uphill battle from this moment forward to try and make a more realistic take on just how good of a head coach is. And I'm really not sure. I think he was good this season. I thought he made some gutsy play calls around the tail end of the season, and being aggressive and coaching and leading his team to play their best amount of football. I think that's something that his intangibles are there definitely as a head coach. Now is to see how he handles another set of adversity and people looking down on the university if things go south. Now we're going to see just what type of sauce, I guess, Ed Orgeron is made out of. One assistant coach that ended up staying is their wide receiver coach. He was getting jobs. He was looked at to become the coach for Nebraska. So he just elected to stay at LSU, and, he has had 20 plus years of coaching experience and getting to know different coaches at the local level. In Louisiana, it just seems to be that he wanted to stay at the place that he, I guess, called home for the last couple years, or for the last half decade or so. And now it seems like he's found a place for himself. So that's one person that Ed Orgeron can definitely still rely on and build upon. So LSU is not crumbling before our very eyes. But at the same time, the reality is this team set an expectation for itself and reached it so high to the pinnacle of whatever team can ever do. So now it's time to come back down to earth and to reevaluate, because they don't have a supposed generational quarterback anymore, or they don't have a once in a blue moon quarterback anymore. We don't know what they have yet. So now it's time to really look and see what they can make out of what they have, what their recruiting class is going to look like. And I'm sure LSU is always a high profile program, so the lights will be on them for sure. and it's going to be even brighter now since they just recently won. And the stories are just going to keep piling up on whether or not they can repeat, whether or not they can be competitive again to this level. Can they beat Alabama next year? Because it will still always be, can such and such team out of the SEC West beat Alabama? Because if you can't beat Alabama, that means that the season is only for a short amount of time for you. No matter when Alabama is scheduled to play you, that's when your season either ends or continues, because they're just such a juggernaut force that they stay in the top four. They've been in the top four for the decade, it seems like. So, and they just find ways to make things difficult for other teams in the SEC to really move forward into the playoff structure as it is constructed right now. So LSU is definitely going to have a lot of work to do this offseason. And maybe the celebration's already done for Ed Orgeron. Maybe he's back to work. I remember I was watching the end broadcast of all the national championship shenanigans, and he was asked by Scott Van Pelt of ESPN, like, just how are you going to celebrate? And he said something very Louisiana-like. He said, or down south country Louisiana, where he said he's just going to get a ham sandwich with his boys and probably get some boudin. If you never had boudin, got to try that, because it's definitely a Louisiana delicacy of its source. So, yeah, it's just LSU is going to be able to do some things next year, I'm sure, but just how much are they going to be able to really do stuff, especially on the offensive end? I think most people feel that LSU, no matter who the defensive coordinator is, what the talent that gets pulled into that program just from in-state is insurmountable. So I think, especially on the defensive end, so defense has always been something that LSU has been able to kind of live off of. Now it's, can they keep up that offensive expectations that they created for themselves this year? Can they still be innovative? Are they going to go closer to more of a run heavy style again? Or are they going to keep going with this heavy passing attack and find a quarterback or recruit a quarterback or get somebody on the transfer portal that can really help them continue to be successful in this sort of scheme? As we know, Joe Brady was one of the guys that came from New Orleans Saints, who has one of the more modern offenses that we've seen, or Sean Payton has helped the NFL look more modern, and one of the pioneers of this air raid sort of style of attack that's been taking football over storm, and you see it with Kansas City Chiefs now, and of course, all different types of teams are getting into the passing game for just stupid amount of yardage and passing yards as quarterbacks get better and better, and schemes are more designed to get guys open in space. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Ed can keep this level of play consistent on the field as the coaching carousel continues to go round and round and round and round. So I'm going to take another quick break, and then after that, we're going to talk about a top 25 poll that came out from ESPN. That's maybe a little bit too soon, but it's never too soon to start looking at next season. That's coming up.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alrighty, so ESPN put out a poll for rankings for the top 25 teams. That might be a little bit too early, as they said in their own article. However, that's what makes it fun, looking at teams' futures and just where they all stack up. So we're going to look outside of the top 10 for a little bit first before we get into the top 10, because that's what makes it all fun. Number 15 is Michigan, and the idea of the Michigan program seems to be it's either now or never with Jim Harbaugh as his 6th season as coaching the place where he graduated from, and the Wolverines are 48-17 under their head coach, but they have not been able to beat Ohio State, and they just lost their fourth bowl game again, and they lost against Alabama in the recent one. So they are going to, of course, be in a similar situation that they have been. All different types of things can go wrong for them, but the one thing that has always been their challenge, of course, is going up against Ohio State. And honestly, if you look at where the rest of the Big Ten have come, Michigan is not going to have the easiest road to maybe even their title game as far as their division. So if you look at it, they have an opening game against Washington, and then they play at Michigan State, and then they play at Minnesota, and then they play Ohio State. And those teams they're not easy to play against, to be honest. They're not going to get an easy playthrough at all, really. And I'm not sure if their team is going to be good enough on offense to really make a big wave to punch themselves into top 4 contention. They might get, like, if they get a good run, they may be able to get to like the 7th seed or the 7th ranking. But I just don't think they'll be playing enough competition, and by that time, I don't think they'll have I think they might lose at least one game before they get to Ohio State to really see exactly where they're going to be at. So, of course, we can look at the SEC teams. Like, we have 2 in there outside of the top 10 that could potentially move up. So we have Auburn at 12, and we have Texas A&M at 11. So Texas A&M has an interesting placement, as they might be able to go really deep run where they don't lose a game until they play Auburn in October, and if they close that gap and are able to really make a name for themselves and really play well, they have a chance to really get in there, because of course they play Alabama, who is of course ranked again in the top 4, and they play LSU to finish off the season. So those are 2 ginormous games that could really make all the difference in the world for Texas A&M. And of course for Auburn, they're going to be playing LSU and they're going to be playing Alabama. So it's really the sky's the limit if they can just win out. And that's really tough to say. That's better. It's easier said than done. But if they can win out, they can kind of dig themselves out of a 12-spot hole. That honestly, the way they played last year, they were pretty good too. So you never really know. Oregon is ranked 5th. So Oregon ranked 5 is a little bit concerning to me, because I think their quarterback that's going to replace Justin Herbert is going to be okay. But I don't know. The Pac-12 is an interesting conference that sometimes teams can get hot and they become the team of the 2-year window. They're like a 2-year window kind of conference. So it's going to be higher scoring no matter what, and there's going to be a lot of good quarterback play. But it really just depends on who comes out of that conference. Like USC could turn it around for once. Arizona State likes to get frisky every now and again. Stanford has a good year. Every 2 to 3 years, their program can produce a really good product. So I'm not too sure about Oregon, And I don't really think they can ease their way into the top 4. And if they do, it'd be early on. If one of the top 4 seeds loses early, maybe they can slide in there, but I don't think there'll be a name stake in the top 4. Georgia's ranked 6th, which I think Georgia probably should be ranked 5th, but it's really all depending on what they can do on offense. Jake Fromm, of course, is leaving for the draft, but it's just going to be really interested. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do with that transfer from Wake Forest, and if their offense can really, I guess, morph into something more than itself. So LSU had to do similar things where they had to morph their offense to the modern standards. Not to say that Georgia's offense was archaic just as LSU's, but it's been a long time, really, since the championship game that Georgia was last in, and the game has changed. You have to be able to move the football down the field. Either that means with your quarterback running and throwing, or your offensive scheme just has to be prolific, and you got to have the right pieces to really pull that kind of stuff off. So Georgia has just as any good route to the national title as they do for the past 4 years, really. So they're going to be opening against Virginia, and then they play Alabama September 19th, and then they go against Florida in October. So they're going to play some big-time teams, and it's going to be something that they're going to have to look at over this offseason and just really build on this offensive game plan and really diversify the playbook, because at the end of the day, if you're not being unpredictable on offense, if you're not keeping defenses guessing, it's going to be a tough uphill battle no matter how good your defense is. Georgia's defense was extremely good this year. Granted, they weren't good enough to really stop LSU, but they weren't giving LSU any run for their money on their defense because Georgia's offense was just not getting it done. So let's go ahead and look at the top 4, where we have number 1 ranked is Clemson, number 2 is Ohio State, number 3 is Alabama, and number 4 is LSU. And I think number 4 is probably a good place for LSU to be at, considering just so many people leaving and just how really important Joe Burrow was to this whole run. It's going to be hard to replace him. It's going to be hard to replace Joe Brady, and it's going to be really tough to replicate something so incredible. Really, this run will go down in history as something that probably will never happen again. So it's going to be tough to see if they can keep into the top 4 this season. I'm sure teams get more competitive each year. Recruiting classes get more competitive, and the parity within college football changes so drastically sometimes. So with that said, if we look at Alabama at 3, I predict that they'll probably stay in the top 4 just because of how really consistent they are. They've won 11 games for 9 straight seasons, so they don't lose very often. They have really good seasons, and their record speaks for themselves. So you can only assume that they're going to have a really good chance at continuing this streak of staying in playoff contention, and we're just going to have to see what Mac Jones is able to do, if he can even win the job. He definitely started he started in place of Tua when he was hurt, and he got some good yardage. He had 14 touchdowns, almost 2,000 yards. He had about 500 yards shy from there, but we'll just have to see exactly what that happens. And of course, it's going to be it's going to be really big to see just how Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields do as their junior seasons are approaching. So we're just going to have to wait and see exactly what those guys do. But I expect big things. They're probably going to be in the Heisman Trophy race early on in the season, and probably will keep that race going, as it'll be a 1-2 battle between those two. And of course, there's always somebody that appears out of the blue that might be in there giving them a run for their money as well. So I'm going to take one more break, and then coming back, we're going to get into some more college talk, but a little bit more fun. So that'll be coming up.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so if you know me, you know I like food and I like football. So F&F, thought it would stand for fantasy football. No, stands for food and football. Last time I was on the air, I talked about some good snacks and good party food to have for national championship. And now I'm going to talk about some stuff that you can find at a university stadium. So this is my kind of gripe with university stadium food, just because, you know, I came from a Division II school, so it's not as grandiose. You don't have all the caterings, all the best foods. So, you know, it's just interesting to see what comes out of a typical concession stand at football games. So in my experience, a Division II football team typically has the same type of concessions that a high school football team would have. They're not super extravagant. There's only so much on the menu that they can have. Some things are overpriced while other things are kind of reasonably priced. You just kind of have to pick and choose which one you're going to go for at the time. And you're never really going to feel like you got your money's worth. That's the weirdest thing, huh? You never really feel like you got your money's worth. So the first thing that you have to look at in these type of concession stands is, are you going to be served like a Chick-fil-A or something like that? So let's just bring it here. Chick-fil-A will never be the move if you're trying to save dollars at a concession stand, just because it's really expensive for a chicken sandwich if you really think about it like that. It's for at your convenience that they're offering a premium item. So a chicken sandwich at a concession stand is going to cost you like $4, when if you go to Chick-fil-A, it's going to cost you maybe $3 for just the entree. So it's already an upcharge. You know that sandwich has been sitting in a hot box, so it's not fresh. You just don't want that. Don't put yourself through that lifestyle choice at a football game, because you're going to probably finish that sandwich right before you even get back to your seat, or you're sitting there, and it's not as enjoyable as you would want it to be. I feel like sandwiches are not field food. That's what I like to call it, field food. So for me, I've been fortunate enough to be involved in on my school's media when I was at my university. So I was able to go into the press boxes and get the press reception type food. So they'd have food for press, people running stats and stuff like that. And food's not as different as what we get in the concessions, just because there's that, and then there's the upper level. See, we never made it. Us sideline guys never really made it up to the upper level of the food chain, so to speak. The third level is where all the really, really good catering comes in, but the second floor, that's where I lived for the last few years. It's just, you got your general Papa John's pizzas, your rolls, your wraps. Those type I go for just because it just seems quicker. I don't know what it is about sandwiches. Sandwiches just don't seem like the food that you want to bring out to, you want to sit on stone bleachers and watch your team go. Sandwich is not the move. Now, I think the number one food to go for are nachos by far, just because they work in so many different ways. If it's cold outside, the nacho cheese will be warm. It'll be nice in your hand. So it's doing two birds, one stone. It's feeding you and it's keeping at least 50% of your phalanges warm. Now, another thing about really getting into the food topic here is that you got to make sure that you have a beverage of choice that you can be okay with, just because sometimes the food can be harsh, can be tough on your throat, or, you're screaming, you're yelling, you're talking trash. You gotta be able to hydrate and keep yourself in the game, so to speak. So, of course, water is always the best solution to have. Problem is, water is up. They charge a lot for water sometimes, especially bottled water. So, the next thing is, they have the Powerades, the Gatorades. It's all similar things here. Or you can get, when it's cold, they have coffee or hot chocolate. And that's usually when, they sell the most. I've never seen a place sell more hot drinks than when it's a cold day and people pretend like they didn't know it was going to be cold. And they still sell like out in 2 minutes. So I guess it's more of a supply and demand thing. It's not like they're charging so much for said hot chocolate or coffee, because to be honest, they probably buy a few boxes worth. They probably spend $5 and get at least 3 or 4 boxes worth of the stuff, and they charge for $1 a pop, and people are going to pay that no matter what it is, because, they got 2 jackets on, but they still think that, I'm going to be good. I don't need any hot chocolate. The first time someone goes up and buys some and they smell it and they see the steam coming off, and, it's just the aroma, the feeling, knowing that they want their hands warm, no matter if they have gloves on, and just holding a warm substance, that's just it's all enticing. It's like a marketing ploy, but without marketing. Everyone's just gonna go get it. And it's just kind of like tradition at this point. You just have to do it. It does it at high school football games, seeing people in, nice fuzzy hats, the fur gloves and all that, and then a nice cup of hot chocolate that just goes right with football games. You just know it happens. And as it gets colder and colder, as the weather changes, the more frequent it gets. And honestly, the more the prices will go up. So you gotta be very wary of the economics and the ups and downs of the concession stock market in football. So here's my point here. So when you go out to these sporting events, you got to save your money. You don't want to overspend. You want to be able to make sure that you or your family is fed in the best shape possible. So here's what you got to do. One, if you're thinking about feeding yourself in the best way possible, bring food from home. And if you can't bring it in the parking lot, of course, most stadiums don't let you do that. So you might just have to eat before you go, or, eat in the car, or go do something like that. Especially if you're like in a smaller school, you can kind of come in and out and no problem. Especially if you're a student, typically you're not getting charged too much, so you can come in and out. But if that's not an option, try to think about, more bang for your buck. You may want to leave the candy on the counter and try and get something more fulfilling, something that might be able to work in 2 different ways instead of just one. So, instead of that Coke, you can get some hot chocolate. Instead of that Chick-fil-A sandwich, get a pair of nachos, and you can share it with your boo in the middle of the stands. But that's what's going to wrap it up for the rest of the show. Thank you for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would encourage you all to go like and leave a nice review for the podcast, or leave whatever you want to say as a review for the podcast on any platform that you listen to. Please don't forget to follow our social media. That would be Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I encourage you all to have a wonderful rest of your days and a nice week. And I'll talk to you guys next Monday. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.